Good morning to you, sir. How are we?
I'm very good, Frank. How are you today?
Oh, fine. Listen, I'm chilling out. I'm going to be quite busy this weekend. I'm recording the final audiobook on the Butlins series. I've got the first two are out in audio as well as the electronic and paperback. So this is me completing the set, and I'm going to be doing that over the weekend, which is going to be fun.
Right. Okay then. So let's get into it then. We
Absolutely.
don't have much time to waste. So first of all, the first book, I've not long finished reading it. What time does the Midnight Cabaret start? Now,
yeah.
I remember hearing that. Somebody's saying people being asked that question. So I think it must have been someone who was a former redcoat. But was it as regularly asked as it seems to be intimated?
Absolutely. Every single person that worked as a redcoat was asked that question. Didn't matter what camp you were at, you were always asked that question, and you had to try and give a reply whilst trying to sort of be nice at the same time. You know, when you wear the red blazer, you could get away with it. You know, the usual stock reply was 6:30, but that can. But then again, you could get away with anything in those days.
Yeah. I must admit, I've never worked as a redcoat or as a blue coat at the other.
Blue coat.
We won't mention their name, but I did play at Butlins Ayr, but it was no longer Butlins when I played there. It was called Craig Tara.
Yeah.
So roughly when did it kind of change from Butlins to Craig Tara?
You're talking about 98 was when it stopped. I mean, I've heard so many different reasons as to why it made the move. You know, I don't know if it was to do with maybe enough people coming through the door, or maybe they were trying to develop, new things when the planning permission didn't come through. I've heard so many different stories. I couldn't say that was definitely the reason why, but I think, to be honest, it was the times were changing. You know, the type of holidaymaker was changing, because I actually went back to the camp in 96, back in red and whites, because I was doing an article for one of the papers, sort of turning back the clock to sort of commemorate the anniversary. And just walking through there, you know, you could see that, you could feel it. You could feel the difference, because a lot of the things had changed, because there was a lot of things we did back then. You would get nicked for, to be honest with you. You know, and the thing was, the holidaymakers had changed. You know, the attitudes had changed. There was a lot of things we had back then that they wouldn't even dare run, especially because of the politically correct world that we live in now. I mean, example was things like the cheerful, charming, and chubby competition. You know, the ladies of the fuller figure, as it were, and that was always a major highlight of the week for a lot of people.
Yeah,
but try and run that today, you get killed.
Absolutely, and it brings to mind, of course, the TV series Heidi High, which obviously is a fictional thing, but I've always felt that it was very, maybe not so loosely based on the likes of Butlins, etc. But would that have been correct?
Yeah, well, for starters, the guys that wrote Heidi High actually worked at Butlins.
Oh, right.
Jimmy Perry was a redcoat. I don't know what David Croft wrote, but I know the two of them worked at Butlins. And the thing is, when you're talking about characters, or when you talk about writing a book, the first thing they always say is write about what you know. And so the thing is, even when like they were doing Dad's Army, it was always based on people that they've known or people they've met. Yeah. And the thing was, Heidi High was based in the 1950s, but a lot of people could relate to what was going on in that TV series, to what was going on at the time. I mean, people used to say the Spike character was me. You know, the wannabe stand-up comedian who fell in love with a fellow redcoat, you know. And we had our own version of Ted Bovis, Big Joe. Right. Fantastic singing voice, comic time was absolutely fantastic, always a guaranteed favourite. So when people saw what was going on the TV, but they didn't, they tried to sort of relate that, because we were sort of in the latter stages of that era. Yeah. You know, and I mean, we were given instructions not to say Heidi High to people at the start of one of the seasons. You know, it was 1983. We were told, on no account do you mention Heidi High. Right. And of course, the one thing about redcoats, they're not one for sticking to the rules. You know.
Well, I must admit, I did get that flavour throughout the book, that, shall we say, the rules would be bent
Oh, yes.
to a certain point. And I think it comes across quite clearly in the book that even though they were bending the rules, the redcoats pretty much knew how far they could push, before it would be, as it says in the book, they would be sent up the hill.
Oh, yeah. I mean, when the thing with the hill, if you get sent up the hill, that was the ultimate deterrent, because your purpose there was to make people's holiday special. And you always be there, never turn up late, and you make sure they have the best possible time. If you didn't deliver that, then you are definitely up the hill. But what you find is when you went to the different camps, their sort of restrictions, they were a bit more formal the further south you went.
Yeah.
But the thing is, at Ayr, we used to get away with murder, But like so when you go down to sail at Bognor, you try and do the same things you did at Ayr down at the Bognor camp. They would take umbrage with that.
So let's have a wee chat about Terry.
Yes.
Now, I'm going to stick my neck out here and you can chop my head off if you like, but I'm 100% convinced that is you.
Yeah, you guessed. You guessed.
And the reason why I thought that? Mainly because I listened to your radio show on indylive.radio.
Yeah.
And I must say I really, really enjoy it. But
Good.
I also heard the little bit of the chat that you did on the daytime show with Val and Marlene.
Yes.
And just based on that, and then obviously reading the book, within a couple of pages, I thought, that it's perhaps not autobiographical, but it's very clearly based on, probably your early life.
Yeah, that's how it all started, actually, that first book. And I had worked, when I got to hook up with all the different Butlins people, there were some of them were writing their biographies, and I thought, I fancy doing that myself. But then I thought, only people are interested in reading biographies are people that are famous. I mean, who would want to read this one? Plus, also, as I wrote the first 8 chapters, there was a lot of gaps in there.
Yeah.
Because the thing is, if I put down what I thought was what actually happened, I'm going to get contradicted. So I thought, well, why don't just do a sort of fictionalized version of what was me. And the thing was, what happened to me was my starter for 10. There was a lot of things that happened in that book which was actually accurate. I've changed the names. Obviously, people were saying I should have put real names in there, but I thought, no chance. It would boost their egos up no end. Plus, they would claim royalties for a start.
Absolutely.
But plus the thing was, I just finished doing the creative writing course at the Open Uni, and the thing was, the first thing they always tell you when you're doing writing is write what you know. And I thought, well, that's a good way. That's a good place to start, because at the time I had started doing like some websites about Butlins and stuff like that, and I thought, well, it seemed a natural progression to go down that road. And I thought, well, 1982 was a big game changer for me, because I was Mr. Shy, Sweet and Innocent, and the thing was, when you started as a redcoat, you had to be Mr. Personality, Mr. Extrovert. I wasn't that, and that was the thing I tried to convey in that book, the fact that Terry was the sort of shy, introvert kind of person who enjoyed doing certain things, but when it came to the interaction side of things, he was very weak on that. And it wasn't until I walked through the gates at Ayr, suddenly it became a culture shock. And the huge characters that worked there,
I mean, I must admit, I could relate slightly to the character of Terry. I wasn't perhaps as shy and retiring as he was, because I performed, for many years, playing in bands and acting and stuff like that. But off stage, I was a completely different person from who I was on stage. It was very much a case of going on stage, I put on this sort of persona, and a lot of people who met me outside of being performing were quite surprised at the difference between the two, and I guess that was probably the same for Terry.
Yeah, because I mean, it's a switch. I mean, the thing is, performing is a switch, because I mean, you've seen a lot of hang on a sec, get rid of that. That's the thing about, see all these things that keep cropping up. When you speak to a lot of performers, you know, they go on stage is because they've got to just flick a switch. And the thing is, the moment they come off that stage, they're basically sort of going back to being Mr. Joe Normal. Very rarely do you see the same person on a stage as what you do when you get away with it. I mean, that was said to me, you know, when you listen, if I do any performing and they see me in real life, they say, you're not the same person, you know, and that happens to a lot. I mean, a lot of big performers would say that.
Yeah. And I think I might be wrong here, but was it difficult to be like that almost 24/7?
Oh, yeah.
You would have grown into it, obviously, over the course of the season and the years that you worked as a redcoat. But initially, how much more difficult was it for you specifically, or Terry specifically?
The big issue was it was the first big adventure on your own. And the thing was, in the book, we talk about Terry's first. He suddenly thought he was going to go to Ayr in May. And he then decides, he finds out he's going to go to Wales.
Yeah.
And the thing was, that was a big thing for me when it happened to me, because you got to meet the people you were working with, and you were getting used to the idea of working with people around you in terms of the campers or potential campers. And the thing was, that was a tough couple of weeks for me, because I didn't know which way to turn. And the thing was, these guys, a lot of these guys knew each other already.
Yeah.
And so I was almost getting taken under these people's wings, as it were. And they were such brilliant characters, and they were eventually, you start to feel more relaxed, and you learned from people like that. And it was difficult. And the thing was, whilst I was still Mr. Shy, the thing was, the first week of the season, I actually was put in front of the Stuart Ballroom audience, 3,500 people, being the DJ. And the thing was, at the time, I hadn't operated a disco unit in my life. and see the thing in the book when we're talking about how we ended up on that.
Yeah,
that's true. That actually happened.
I mean, I must admit, it's one of the things that kind of steered me away from going down that route that you went down, was that I honestly couldn't have been in that persona so often.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, later on in my career, I worked on cruise ships, but I was always a guest artist. I was never, you know, cruise staff, because I couldn't go about with a smile on my face 24/7. And if I wanted to hide for the passengers, then I could do so. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and the thing is, when you're doing that for 17 weeks, see, once the season finishes, see, trying to stop doing that, that's a difficult bit. You know, because you could be walking along the streets of Glasgow smiling at people and they say, "Who are you smiling at?" You know, and that is so true. But the thing is, when I went into that first season, I was learning, you know, on the job, because, as I said, I was being surrounded by people that had done all this stuff before.
Yeah.
It was bringing out the character side of me, because I got the job not because of my personality, because I didn't have one. I got it because I could dance.
Yeah.
And the thing was, because I was working alongside them, I then got to come out of my shell, get involved in the competitions, because the stuff we used to get up to in the competitions, you know, we basically went crazy, you know. and eventually, as we got halfway through the season, I was just as daft as the rest of them. And we did get up to some real corkers, you know.
Yeah, but then of course that, I suppose, in many ways, that's bound to happen, you know.
Yeah.
Regardless of what sort of work it is that you're doing, you know, the people that you work with do have a tendency to rub off on you, and you kind of fall into the way of doing stuff.
I learned so much in that first year. The likes of, when we're talking about somebody like a guy like Jerry Griffin, Jerry the Tramp, most charismatic compere I've ever come across. And he knew how to handle an audience. And the thing was, when you're working alongside other people, really, really talented people, and I mean, I had this idea, I wanted to get more stage experience. And then when I watched, and the first thing that they taught me was how to connect with people, because that was the most important thing. And obviously, I've got to give credit to my boss as well, because he was on my case from day one. And he actually told me, he kept on going on my case because I never stood up for myself.
Right.
And at the end of the season, I was giving it back just as much as him.
But then that shows the growth, of someone who's, if you like, shy and retiring and going into this kind of experience and developing, and it's a short time, isn't it? Really, 17 weeks. I mean, it is a
coming of age type of thing, because that's the whole. I'd say that's the best way to describe that first book. It's a coming of age story, and the thing was, as we were gradually going into the season. I mean, July, we had about 4 or 5 weeks before the start of the actual peak season.
Right.
And that's when the big crowds were coming in, like 5,500 and stuff like that. By then, I was used to it. Yeah. And of course, you were dealing with the people that were coming in each week, or some people stayed there for about 3 weeks, maybe even longer. And you knew how to interact with people. Mm-hmm. As I said at the start, one of the biggest helps for me during those first weeks was the local chaplain, George Sherry. Right. He used to say things to me like, it takes so many hundreds of muscles to frown, so many thousands of muscles to frown, and just a few hundred to smile.
Yeah.
So get your face a rest.
I was going to ask you, actually, and you did kind of cover it there about people staying, sort of longer than like a week or whatever. Because obviously, if you go to a lot of the sort of, we'll call them caravan parks now, as opposed to holiday parks in that sense, you do find there are people who own, their own static van, and they go there pretty much for an entire summer. And I was just wondering, what would have been the kind of maximum stay back then? Would it have been like a week or 2 weeks?
Sometimes it was longer. I've got memories of people staying for about 4 weeks,
right?
Maybe more. And it was the same program every week. They weren't changing the programs every week. Uh-huh. They just stayed there because they enjoyed it so much. Because the best way to describe Butlins back then, it was escapism.
Yeah.
Because you went in there, it was basically all colour, it was just end-to-end fun, morning to night. And when you're in there, you forgot what was going on out in the real world, and there's people that just went there and they just stayed there for weeks. And that was not unusual.
Mm. Yeah. I must admit, as a family, we never ever holidayed anywhere like Butlins. But I do remember going on day trips, like school and that kind of thing. And even though you were, when you say a day trip, it wasn't really a full day in that respect. But I just always remember it being completely frenetic from the point of view of somebody visiting. You wanted to get in everything that you could in that period of time. So I can imagine that it would have been magnified many times for the redcoats.
Well, when you're talking about day visitors, one of the major places used to go, they would always go to, would be the amusement park.
Yeah. And
the thing was, they'd only recently introduced that as a new duty for the redcoats. If you mention amusement park to an ex-redcoat, they would cringe. Because when you were there, you had to, my duty at the time was operating the kiddies rides, the ladybird rides, just pushing the buttons, start and finish and all that kind of stuff. And see if it rained. If it rained, you had to go on the rides with the kids. And that included things like the waltzers and all this kind of stuff, the big umbrellas. And now I didn't have what you call a very strong stomach. And the thing was, it was one of those things, it was almost like serving your apprenticeship. But the thing was, during the course of a day, when we're talking about day visitors, that's always the place they went to, because that place was always heaving during the course of the day. And it was frenetic. But certainly the likes of I think that was really where it made its main money, to be honest with you, because people always it was a great place to go to for the day.
Yeah. And I say, I do have quite vivid memories of going to Butlins Ayr, as a youngster with school and various different sort of groups and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I probably at the time I was thinking to myself, this would be great to be here. All summer long, this would be a great place to be. Probably wouldn't have been, but when you're a youngster, that's just how you kind of think, isn't it?
Well, the thing was, is when you went there, you didn't go there for the money, because our wage there was £38 a week, and we were working 90-hour shifts. And the thing was, we were having so much fun. Plus, that fact is, we were helping to make people's holiday specials. That's why when you speak to a redcoat now, 30 odd years on, it holds special memories for them. It meant so much to them being a redcoat, because it was such a major thing in their lives, because it was life changing. And in the book, being a redcoat was life changing for Terry. And it's the same way being a redcoat became life changing for me.
Yeah, and I think as well, it was a great springboard, wasn't it, for a lot of well-known sort of comics and singers and that,
Oh, yeah.
who went on, from there. Was there anybody in particular that you worked with during your time at Ayr? You don't have to name names if you don't want to, but you went on to, a kind of much better career within show business.
Well, in terms of, when I was in my first season, one of the guys on the resident review company was a guy called Dougie Small. Mm-hmm. Dougie Small ended up winning New Faces.
All right.
Yeah.
I remember that name now that you mention it.
He always used to dress up as Superman.
Yeah, I remember him. Yeah.
Also, I've worked with like some Mary Gordon. I've been in the camp when Mary Gordon Price was a member of that resident review.
Right.
Charlie Drake's son was a compere there one year, and when it comes to the actual redcoats themselves, I would say the most famous one I can think of is a very well-known Scottish DJ by the name of Gary Marshall.
Oh, right, yeah.
Gary Marshall, king of the junior disco. That was him. I would say that was but I mean, the likes of when there was a lot of very talented performers when I was there, but I think none of them actually sort of made it to sort of the big leagues. But the thing was, there were so many really talented people during that time, I mean, there was one guy who was the best. He was a brilliant character actor, putting in performances and all that. And he finished up working at an airport.
Yeah,
and it was never sort of the big names. I mean, I did get to chance to work with the names I mentioned, through the reviews and the cabaret and all that. But I think when you become a redcoat, I mean, nowadays it's all about discovering people. Yeah. When back then the whole point of being a redcoat was to just try and make people's holiday special. But now it's a case of, does my hair look all right? Or audition. You have a redcoat audition, for goodness sake. It's not I got the job. One of the things that helped me get the job was I told them I had radio experience, right? And this is how I got the thing at getting in front of the Stuart Ballroom on the Saturday night. I told the boss that I had radio experience, hospital radio experience, and he said, great, we'll make use of that. But what I didn't tell him was that my experience was hospital radio Paisley reading out the horse racing results on a Saturday afternoon. And next thing you know, and the thing is, the phrase was, you said you could do it when you wrote in.
Yeah.
And that's a common phrase that's used. And a lot of redcoats go in because of, say, one thing and eventually develop into other things. I mean, you look at somebody like Charlie Drake. Charlie Drake was the jiu-jitsu instructor.
Right.
And he eventually became the stand-up comic legend that he was. So a lot of people go in for one reason and they learn as they go along. And when you're talking about launching pads, being surrounded by all that setup, the professionalism, that gives them the confidence and the belief in themselves to sort of move forward. Because I think if I hadn't been working at Butlins, I don't think I'd be doing what I'm doing now.
Yeah. And because of the whole Butlins experience, I know at the end of the first book there, you talk about, maybe going back for the next season,
Yeah.
And obviously you do go back, based on what's happened. But when you started out, did you ever, even for a minute, consider that A, you would last full 17 weeks, and B, you might possibly return for another go at it?
Well, at the time, I just thought I just went into it as a dream job, a job that I never thought I would get in the first place. Because at the time, as far as I was to believe, there was a big waiting list of people wanting to get in there. And the thing was, during the first 6 weeks, you were under the threat of the sack or being sent up the hill if you didn't deliver. And there were times when I did struggle. I didn't think I was going to last the 17 weeks, but there was no way I could walk away because there's no way I could explain to my parents why they're packing the job, you know. And at the end of it, when it came to the final season, you know, when it came to the final week, everything was falling into place. Yeah. And when we did the weekly au revoir, I got introduced onto the ballroom floor by the manager. And because he'd given me such a hard time during the season, he gave me the best references I've ever had. And I just thought, I want to do this again. Yeah. You know, it was not until the end of the season, because you had this sort of lingering doubt in the back of your mind because you didn't know what you were going to do. Next thing you know, end of the season, you think, oh, I want more of this. And I know there was an average time scale for a lot of redcoats for 3 years. I thought, well, if the opportunity arises, I fancy doing that again.
And for me, I think that sometimes it's better to get that nod of appreciation from your peers, you know, rather than, you know, like the people who see you only for a short period of time, but enjoy, you know, whatever it is you're doing, and they enthuse about, you know, how great you are and stuff like that. Because the people, for me, the people that are important really are the people that you work with. And in that situation, the management team, who obviously will have a great deal of experience themselves.
Yeah, I mean, I think the management team definitely deserve a lot of credit, because, I mean, yes, while I was working alongside big characters, they could see I was employed for a specific reason, was getting up to people up to dance. Yeah. And so they were doing everything they could to possibly encourage me. And if I did something wrong, they were the first ones to jump on me from a great height. And because I was not used to this kind of setup, I did struggle to begin with. And eventually, I mean, I think also what certainly helped was when I ended up meeting my good lady there. That certainly helped, because that would never have happened in Greenock, because she was living in Edinburgh at the time. Yeah. And the thing was, that would never have happened if I hadn't gone to Butlins. And so when that happened, my whole persona changed even more. So the thing is, I had all these things coming in different directions, and suddenly I felt I'd made the transition from being the sort of the shy schoolboy to the young adult, you know. And it was by the end of the 17 weeks, and it's the same thing with the Terry character, is he was looking for direction, and the thing was, at the end of it, he found the person he wanted to be, and the person he wanted to be with, because way back then, I had a better idea what I was doing, what I wanted to do, you know. And the fact that my good lady was with me, that made a big difference.
Yeah. And was it difficult to transition back into, if you like, civil life? After your 17 weeks.
Oh yeah. I mean, we did touch on that briefly when we used to do things at the camp, like smiling and saying hello to passers-by, people who don't even know by name. Sometimes we'd be walking past, maybe trying to pinch some people's chips, you know. And it took a good few weeks for that to rub off, because you'd been used to doing it, because they were very strict. This was something you had to do as a redcoat. When you were up from 8 a.m. till 1 o'clock the following morning, you had to be immaculately dressed, and you had to smile, and you had to say hello to people. I mean, there were examples of, you'd have the entertainments manager be standing at the window of the Stuart Ballroom, where you'd look down on the main road of the camp. They would see a redcoat walking along the road towards the Stuart Ballroom, and he would watch to see if they'd actually said hello. If they didn't say hello, he would tell them to go back down the stairs, go back to the end of the camp, and do it again. and this is how important, because see, if you didn't say hello to a camper, very often a redcoat could get in trouble for that. Yeah. And it was ingrained in your mind. And so things, when it became habit forming, it was difficult the moment the red jacket came off. You know, I describe that as a bit of a Clark Kent moment, to be honest with you. And you're then saying, I've got to get back to some kind of normality. And it's a huge buzz. And it's a difficult thing to replace it with. And I think that's why a lot of people moved on to the performance side. You know, whether it's either doing stand-up or doing singing or whatever, or even like the radio, you were looking for something to replace that. You know, and to me, to a certain extent, that's where radio came in.
Yeah.
You know, and I ended up doing 10 years of stand-up as well.
Right. So what sort of how did you come to be doing the stand-up?
It was through Butlins. It was because of Butlins. 1983 season. I saw how a lot of people were trying to develop characters, right? We had the guy, Big Joe Byrne, an absolute legend. He was about 20 stone, and he used to walk about dressed as a schoolboy and selling badges. And the thing was, a lot of people were adopting some kind of characters. And the thing was, in the 1981-2 season, I was a Butlins answer to John Travolta because of my dancing. And I thought, I want to try and create my own kind of character. And so I went into, for some reason, I don't know why, I walked into this shop and I saw these pair of plastic ears. And the things at the time, everybody was doing Prince Charles. Right. And I thought, sounds like a good idea. So I get a pair of plastic ears and I walk about the camp pretending I'm Prince Charles. And next thing you know, people are actually laughing and enjoying it. And while I was doing it, unknown to me at the time, Chris Drake, Charlie Drake's son, who was the compere at the time, he saw what I was doing. And then once we finished, we had a break before the next detail. He just says, do you fancy trying an act like that? And I said, well, I've never done it before. I said, well, I'll help you. And so he wrote about half a dozen gags. And he's teaching me stagecraft, walking on and waiting for laughs and all about timing and all that. And I walked on and I'm doing an act as Prince Charles. And I found myself, hang on, I'm getting laughs.
Yeah.
You know, and it was 800 people in the theatre. You know, I mean, it was to quote Mr. Billy Connolly, it was the best lags that I've ever known. You know, yeah. I spent about 40 minutes in the gentleman's excuse me before I went on because I was so worried. And when I did it and I got the response I got, I thought, well, let's see if we can try and push this a little bit further. And so eventually the impressions became less, and I then started telling more and more gags, and eventually the gags became the main thing.
Yeah.
Then the following year, I was asked if I fancied doing a spot in one of the bars, in the Conti bar. So I ended up doing a half-hour spot on the Continental bar. But the thing is, I was always wanting to get in the Redcoat show, doing stand-up. And eventually what happened was at the end of the final season, that's exactly what I did. And it was after that finished, I thought, well, let's try and see if we can do that in the outside world. And so I ended up doing talent shows and stuff like that. And we were doing, the talent shows around, like I said, the East Coast area and stuff like that. And it kind of evolved from there.
Yeah, yeah. Because, I mean, that period in the 1980s obviously was a very difficult time. Because of, Margaret Thatcher and her policies and shutting down lots of industry and what have you. So I imagine that it would have made it even more difficult for you when you'd done your 17 weeks and you go back into Civvy Street to even consider, in inverted commas, a normal job.
It was difficult, but I think, when after the 84 season, I got engaged in 1983. I knew it wasn't going to last. And so the thing is, when we came to the 84 season, we knew that was going to be our last season. And so we then realised we had to get some kind of work after that. And I got a job in Edinburgh. Wendy got a job in Edinburgh as well in the health club. And it was while I was there, I was kind of saying, well, I don't want to sort of say, right, that was the 3 years at Butlins, that's it, thank you very much. Yeah. I thought, well, I learnt so much there. Why don't I try and put that to good use somehow, even if it becomes a hobby? And eventually what happened was I did the talent shows around the Edinburgh area, Dalkeith and all this kind of places. And now and again, I got the occasional bookings. And next thing I know, I'm doing stand-up on a regular basis. And it was great. I mean, I think there was a couple of times when I wished the ground had swallowed me up. But that's part of the course, Yeah. And but that was for 10 years. And I think the moment Margaret Thatcher left office, I think that's when my comedy career stopped.
Good stuff. So I wanted to talk a wee bit about the dancing.
Yes.
As well. Because obviously you had done very well with that, being in a national dance team and all that kind of stuff. Would you ever Did you ever think that would have been a path that you would have continued to go along, or did there just come a point where you thought, no, I'm not doing it anymore?
It was a natural progression thing with the dancing. I mean, when I first started dancing when I was 8 years old, me and my brother went to the local dance school, and we were doing our exams and competitions and all that. And the thing was, when my brother turned 16, he got to the age where he was invited to join the Scotland formation team. It was run by David and Irene Wood, and he was invited to join that, and so that became his regular thing. And so I saw him on the TV do it, and he went to Belgium and Blackpool and all this kind of stuff. And at the time, though, I'd packed in the dancing when I was 12. I didn't see myself going back. But the thing was, when I saw what he was doing, I could see he was doing really well. And when I turned 16, there were a desperate need for guys to the lineup. And so they did. So my brother said to me, he says, "You know, fancy having a go at it?" I thought, well, why not? And so I ended up, I joined the team, and I was dancing in places like the Albert Hall. And I mean, my first ever, my debut was in the Winter Gardens at Blackpool. You know, a packed Winter Gardens at Blackpool. And that was such a huge thrill. Especially the fact that just before we came on, one of my dance heroes, Bill Irvin, came up to speak to us. The 13 times undefeated world champion came up wishing us good luck, and that was such a thrill. And the thing was, I'd have been quite happy staying in that line. Yeah. But the problem was, we were running drastically short of guys. One of them basically discovered religion, so training on a Sunday was out, and so it was something we eventually it had to stop because we just didn't have enough guys to do it. And it wasn't until the following year. It was the following year I got the job at Butlins. It was because of what happened there. Because of my experience, I got the job at Butlins, and the thing was, I became known as the dancer, you know, and the boss was having me doing disco dancing demonstrations, and he was trying to get me into the Cayley team as well. Thank God I was ill that day. And the thing was, I got the reputation as somebody who did the party dances, and I was always the person to get the people up for the quick waltzes and quick steps and stuff like that. And I got to the point where I loved it, you know. Anytime there was any dance routines going on, I was always the first one there. I could have become a dance teacher, but it's a big commitment to do things like that. I mean, I think it was more the performing element I enjoyed, you know. My wife keeps saying to me, she wants me to teach her to dance, and I've told her I'll do it one of these days, you know. But that was years ago, and she's still waiting. But I mean, the likes of the dancing gave me so many brilliant experiences, and it was because of that I got the job at Butlins. And so it's almost like, you know, your life's journey goes in stages, you know. And I think this is basically where we're looking at in terms of the book. You know, the first book is basically a coming of age. You meet somebody, and you think, right, where's this going? And this is basically, you know, is he going to come back? Is it going? You know, what does he want out of this job if he's going to come back? Is he going to try and do something else? And what's he? You know, once he's got some kind of direction, you know, is there an end goal, or is there something he still wants to do? Because Butlins was such a professional setup. You know, you're going to get, if you say, I want to do X, Y, and Z, there's a good chance you're going to get a chance. And a lot of people did get the chance to do stuff that they've never done before. Yeah.
And that is probably the best thing about doing that, you know, going down that kind of route of being like a red coat or a blue coat or whatever the case may be. It gives you a very good opportunity to try various things. Whether you think you've got a knack for it or not, somebody might see in you, you know, oh, that guy could be a comedian, or you know, that person could be this or that or the next thing, and they give you the opportunity. And I think they also give you the confidence to go for it, because, you know, you might not consider yourself to be, you know, someone who would be able to do X.
No, that's the key word there, confidence. And there's also belief, because when I went there, as I said, one thing I was never was Mr. Personality. I was somebody that could dance. And the thing was, when I was being around all the various people, I started to believe in myself a bit more. And I was one of those kind of guys. Well, at the end of the 17 weeks, I thought, I'm going to have a go at this. And even if I fall flat on my face, at least I know I've tried.
Yeah.
You know, and certainly that's the kind of belief, the confidence. That's, to me, that's your launch pad, because even though a lot of redcoats are associated with being in show business, a lot of redcoats got their belief and their confidence to do so many different things, not necessarily in the entertainment world. You know, when we talk about things like marketing, if you're talking about things like, you know, from a sales point of view, they might not have had the confidence to being amongst the people.
Yeah.
The working at Butlins gave you that, you know, and but certainly certainly when it comes to the opportunity, I mean, likes of Charlie Drake was jiu-jitsu. At the end of the time, he was being you know, the comedian.
Yeah.
I started off as a dancer. Halfway during this, I'm becoming a DJ and a compere. I compared the disco competition, and the thing was, for the so-called shy boy, suddenly find yourself doing that. You know, it's such a huge step up, and the rewards you were getting was absolutely amazing. You know, I mean, the money was rotten, but who cares?
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing. I think, you know, a lot of people probably wouldn't have realised, you know, at the time, just sort of how poorly, you know, the redcoats were paid, and probably how much time they actually spent doing their job.
Yeah, I mean, we started off. You had to be up for 8 o'clock in the morning for breakfast. Smartly dressed, with a smile, all that jazz. You worked up till about 12:30, 1 o'clock, by then everything had shut down. If you were involved in the Redcoat show, that you would be rehearsing until 3 o'clock in the morning, and you still had to be up for 8 o'clock. If you were involved in the midnight cabaret, then that would take you to about 3 o'clock as well. So you still had to be up in time, and it was a regular thing, you know. But very often the adrenaline would kick in, you know, and the one thing you were told was never be late for anything, and it was, everybody was so focused. You know, there was a team of about 30 or 35 of us or something like that, and every single one of them brought something to the table. They were absolutely brilliant. I mean, I know, look, we were just part of a big picture. You know, the Redcoats did one thing, but the thing is, all the other people at Butlins played their part as well. You know, the different departments. You know, we were just one element of the final product. But certainly from the Redcoat point of view, it was a game changer, and that's to a certain extent what life changes, and that's really what that first book's about. It's a culture shock. It changes a young man's life in terms of belief in himself and being around somewhere totally different. And it ends up, during the course of it, his life changes on a personal level because he meets someone. And that's because, to be honest, when I wrote this first book, I never for 1 second expected to be labelled under the romantic element. You know, that was never my intention. It just sort of kind of fell into that category, you know. But certainly with the likes of, when people read the book, they're going to see historical accuracy of what it was like working there, what it was like to go on holiday there. Yes, there's a lot of fictional stuff in there. It's like a fictionalized version of what happened to me. You know, that's the best way to describe it. But certainly it's the start of a journey. I mean, that's basically what part one is. It's a journey. And likes of that title, I couldn't call it anything else, to be honest with you.
Yeah. I must admit, when I started to read the book, I love reading, you know, and I read lots of different types of books. And I started to read it, and I was probably a couple of pages into it. And that was the point where it was like, I can't put this down.
Oh, that's good to hear. I'm so glad this program's recorded.
And every time I picked it up to read, if I was going to have to go and do something, I was like, I don't want to do this. You know, I don't want to put it down. I want to know what's going to happen next. You know. I
mean, I think one of the key elements of the book is it's bringing back a lot of memories for folk.
Yeah.
You know, because a lot of people, when they talk about the competitions like the Noblinese or the Cheerful, Charming and Chubby, you know, people can sort of look at it and think, I remember those competitions. You know, I remember being stood up in a chair in a dining room in front of 1,000 people. They're all singing "Happy Birthday" to me. You know, you know, there's a lot of elements about the old style Butlins that people still look back with fondness today, even though times do change. But there's a lot of people that still love reminiscing about that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, when I performed in a Ceilidh band, and we used to travel around the holiday parks all over Scotland, to Granny Sealing up in Embo, Nairn, you know, all these kind of places. And I used to do a family show bit before the actual Ceilidh band part.
Yeah.
And I always remember one of the bass player in the band, the other guys were in one of the bars having a drink, and I was doing my stuff. And for whatever reason, somebody from the staff had gone through and said, "You've got to come through and see this." And I used to do this competition where it was predominantly the kids that were taking part. And on the disco decks, we had some sound effects machines, and every sound effect, there was an action to it.
Yeah.
And this particular day, don't know why, but I just thought, do you know what? I stopped it and I went, "Right, kids, I want you to go and get your dad or your granddad or your uncle, whichever male is here with you on holiday, to come up on the floor with you." Mm-hmm. So that they all run off, and there's this one wee laddie's sort of still standing there. And I'm like, go on, you know, go and get. And he's like, "But I don't have anybody like that." I went, "Do you know what? See that man over there? Go and ask him. He won't say no."
Yeah.
So the wee boy trips across and saying to the guy, and I could see this guy was like, "Oh, I don't know about that," you know. But of course he gets up, you know, because you start getting the audience to G him up, so get them all up. And one of the actions was you played this particular sound, and they'd to lie on the floor and wave their arms and legs in the air and scream at the top of their voice. And this was the bit where they went in and got the other guys for the band to come through, because they couldn't believe that I had these adults doing this childish thing, you know. And somebody said to me afterwards, "You know, how did you know that would work?" And I said, "Well, I didn't know it would work." I says, "But the point is, they're there on holiday. They're there to have a good time. It doesn't matter if they make a fool of themselves."
That's the key. That's the key thing. That's the key thing. Because I mean, on my first season, one example of the Noblinese competition, me and this guy were, because back then you were volunteered. If a redcoat clocked you were volunteered to take part in this competition for the exact same reasons you're talking about. We were trying to get people up for the Noblinese competition. And there were a bit reluctant, to say the least. And so we clocked this guy sitting in a chair at one end of the ballroom and saying, "Right, come on, Noblinese competition, come on, join in." And he says, "I'm not getting up from this seat." So what we did was we picked up the seat, him still sitting on it. We carried him in, still sitting on his seat. We actually rolled up his trouser legs, you know. And that was the kind of mentality we had. I mean, you look at some of the old photographs at the Butlins, even the other camps, you've got examples of the campers being carried in with their legs and their arms and all this kind of stuff. Yeah. And when you're doing things like It's a Knockout, it was always the redcoats who tried to persuade people to get involved, and for the reasons that you talked about. You know, you're there on holiday, you don't want to just sit there and look like an old sourpuss, you know.
Absolutely.
And the thing is, when you're being marked, as soon as the audience see this guy's got the audience will play their part trying to get you to come up, and you can't say no, because you're not just talking about fighting either a kid or maybe the redcoats. You're talking about the thousands of people that are watching your every move.
Yeah. I mean, I do remember as a boy, probably about, I don't know, maybe 8, 7, something like that. I can't remember where it was we were on holiday, but we were on holiday and we were at this show thing. And it was kind of like that, you know, they were trying to get people up to take part in this competition. And I get dragged up, and it was who was the best Tarzan call.
Oh yeah,
that was the competition, you know, and I won it. You know, and I think that was probably the first time I'd ever won anything in my life. You know, and I went about as if I was 10 foot tall.
Aye. We had some. There were some brilliant competitions. I mean, the cheerful, charming, chubby one was always a guaranteed crowd pleaser. You know, it was absolutely mobbed, and the women turned up and they really threw themselves into it, you know, and it was, I do highlight that element of this competition in the book. Mm-hmm. The incident in question is exactly what actually happened to me, and certainly things like, you know, later on in one of the other series, I touched on the Noblinese, and the thing was, at that point, people were expected to participate. Doesn't matter if you didn't want to do it or not. You know, we'll talk you through it. Or talk you around it, as it were. Mm. And every competition, this is when we're talking about the latter stages of Heidi High, because that's what at that time was. people were being persuaded to join and they were volunteered.
Yeah.
And that's something that was always a thing you expected at Butlins. If you go to Butlins, you go to a competition, there's a good chance you're going to be volunteered to take part. You know, and that's exactly what happened during that first season.
Yeah. No, I can still, even to this day, I can envisage when you're talking there about, carrying somebody in a chair, because they're a bit reluctant. I mean, I can actually see that in my mind's eye, and I can hear the audience reaction to that. Do you know what I mean? It is such a very visual experience, even if you've not physically been there and seen it happen. If somebody describes it to you and you've seen something similar, you're going to pick up on it.
I mean, another example of when somebody was being persuaded was the Bonnie Baby competition. One of the judges was the vicar's wife, right. And she said that she didn't know what the baby food tasted like. So the Redcoats, you know where I'm going with this. The Redcoats then decided to make a portion up. So they got some of the sachets, poured it in, and they started to mix it up. And they decided they're going to get her taste. They're going to. I don't want to do it. So they basically got a napkin, put the napkin round it, and they basically got her to open up her mouth, and they put the stuff in her mouth, in her face. And of course, the photographer's on hand to capture every single moment.
They always are.
Exactly. And I mean, that was another example of things we did. But I mean, there was one time when we had the picture of health competition, and there was a kid, was it 9-year-old kid or something, who was learning judo. It was a picture of health, who was learning judo, and the guy who was comparing was the kiddie's uncle, and he said, "Can you do any of those throws and things like that?" "Oh yeah," she says. "I think Redcoat Frank might be. Can you do this in Redcoat Frank?" So next thing I know, I have to get my jacket off, and I'm meant to be pretending I'm being thrown over the shoulder by this 9-year-old, and I hurt my back in the process. And the thing is, this was an example. I mean, it wasn't just a case of Redcoats volunteering the punters to take part.
Yeah,
the Redcoats were being persuaded to get involved as well. I mean, there is an element of that in the book when we talk about the cheerful, charming, chubby competition, which kind of sort of broke that helped to bring the Terry character out of his shell, and there was a lot of that during the course of that year.
Yeah, and I think one of the things about those types of holidays, were that even if you were reluctant to get involved with something, as a member of the audience getting dragged on stage or whatever the case might have been, I think I can safely say that the vast majority of them, when they would look back on it, they would laugh about it.
Oh, yeah.
Forget about the fact that they were reticent to begin with.
Now, I mean, see, if somebody comes away from a Butlins holiday as a Butlins competition winner, thousands of people at the camp, and I'm the one who's number one, or look at the certificate I got. It's a badge of honour. Even for the Noblinese competition or the cheerful, charming, chubby, a lot of people were quite proud to get that because there's such a big thing. I mean, granted, there was the money competitions as well, which was a different kettle of fish because those were the competitions where we had to behave ourselves.
Yeah.
The Holiday Princess, the Miss Sheen, all that, because that was going to national finals. Whereas the thing is with the other competitions I mentioned before, you can basically it's a free for all.
Yeah.
But certainly a lot of people went there because of the competitions. They enjoyed even watching it, but even just the idea of saying, right, I'm going to try and win the talent contest this year.
Yeah.
And even if they get it to the actual main stage, it's a proud moment for a lot of them.
Yeah. And for many people, that is probably the only time that they would ever, be involved with anything like that. They would feel like a celebrity for a week. Yeah.
And I mean, the likes of when you see, I never did much when I was doing the stuff with the talent competition. You see people that are coming on there feeling really nervous, and they come off to sort of huge round of applause and all that. And the big smile on their faces, it meant a lot,
Yeah. Right, we're almost out of time. But I just want to briefly go back to the book. That there was a point in the book when you're going away to Wales,
Yeah.
You know, and you talk about, you know, your mum and dad coming up on the train with you up to Central Station and all that kind of stuff. And I must admit, it struck a chord with me. I remember the first time I ever went away anywhere without, you know, being with my family.
Yeah.
It wasn't to go to Wales in relation to a job or anything like that. It was actually going away with the Scouts.
All right.
To a summer camp. But I remember my mum and dad, you know, coming with me, and, you know, the fuss my mum would make about, you know, have you got this packed, have you got that packed, you know, have you got clean this, have you got clean that, you know. And when I was reading that, you know, I must admit I had a wee bit of a tear in mind, you know, because it just brought back a great memory, you know, of my own mum, who sadly is no longer with us.
Yeah.
But it was a sad moment, but at the same time, it was a great moment, obviously for yourself and for Terry, because it was the start of that adventure.
That was it, an adventure. That was it. It's an adventure. I mean, the likes of, I had gone down to Wales before with my brother when we were both doing the dance team. So the thing is, it was a case of I wasn't sort of shouldering all the responsibility on my own. But the thing was, when I'd left school, and this was the first time I was really doing something big, you know, and as you said, it's an adventure. I was going to a part of the country I've never been to before in my life. I didn't know where I was going. All I knew was I had a ticket to get me to a particular station. Then after that, I just didn't know what was going to happen next. Yeah. And, you know, and that was the thing, trying to find your way. And that's why the thing at the Kids Weeks was so good, because it was a good breaking in period for me, and that really set me up nicely for the start of the season. And the thing was, there was so many big things in that first year. You know, it kind of sort of 82 was the transformation. You know, and the thing is, once you get past 82, it's a case of saying, right, where do we go from here? Because so much happened in that first year. Yeah, you know, and it was a coming of age, but it was life changing in all directions. And I think you speak to a lot of ex-redcoats, they probably say the same thing. It was life changing. Yeah. You know, for a whole multitude of different reasons, you know. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much for taking the time out to chat with me.
It's a pleasure.
Once we finish this and I get this all edited and all the rest of it, I'm going to make a start on book 2. Yep. Because sandwiched in between reading book 1, what time does the Midnight Cabaret start? And the second book, I've actually read another book for another author who I'm going to be chatting to as well. So yeah, it's busy, but like yourself, thank you very much. I really appreciated it. And I'm looking forward to chatting to you once I've read the second one.
No, it's going to be an absolute pleasure again, sir. Nice to meet you at last.
You too, yeah. Thanks a lot. Have a good day.
And you, bye.